so that's really, and I think a lot goes back to that, but it's incredibly international. So really, no.
live stream. So welcome to our penultimate coffee and conversation. I'm Darren Collins. I'm the president here of COA. And today we have a discussion between Will Thorndike and John Bredar. And next week is our last talk. David Shaw, who's a marine mammalogist and marine scientist, will be here on Tuesday. He's a really interesting person. I highly recommend coming back. But today, Will is, most of you know, is a trustee of the College of the Atlantic, and will be in discussion with our featured guest, John Bredar from WGBH in Boston, Vice President for National Programming. And I'm not going to try and introduce John because I'm hoping that some of that will come out in the conversation. But we're very excited to have John here. And just to set the stage a little bit, Will, if you don't know, has been coming to MDI since he was a little pipsqueak. His Aunt Betty was one of a founding trustee here at the College of the Atlantic, which she passed in, when did Aunt Betty pass? In
92.
92, yeah. And then over a decade ago, Will joined the board here of COA and was board chairman for 5 years. Just stepped off a year and a half ago or so, a year ago, more or less. Will founded Houstonic Partners down in Boston. It's a private equity firm. He is a writer. He is an avid hiker. He loves this island. He bleeds MDI, I always say. And he and his wife Jeannie and his 2 kids have a beautiful home here on Spring Street, and has been so involved in helping see this college mature and be what it is today. And he's also a great friend and a great mentor to me. So thank you, Will, for doing this. Thank you, John, for coming. I'll let you two take it away and go from there. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks very much, Darren. Let's see, so it's just a great treat to have John here with us this morning. So I'm going to give a little bit of background before we dive into conversation, but John is the head of programming for WGBH in Boston. And for those of you who don't know it, WGBH is a bit of a unique animal. So it is both the PBS station for Massachusetts, the entire state of Massachusetts. It's also the largest producer of programming for PBS nationally. It produces about 30% of the entire primetime lineup for PBS. And so John, among other things, oversees WGBH's sort of tentpole programs. So these would be Masterpiece, Nova, Frontline, American Experience, and Antiques Roadshow. Those 5 franchises have been around for an average of 35 years. Masterpiece, the oldest among them, is actually the exact same age as the college. Remarkably, 1971. And they are among the most respected programs on television and have earned literally dozens of Emmys and Peabodys over the years. John also oversees Studio 6, which is sort of a skunkworks R&D production arm, which we'll talk a little bit about. But before he became a programming mogul, a very understated mogul, John was a exceptional practitioner himself. He worked at National Geographic for 26 years before coming to GBH, and he was responsible for developing and producing over 150 programs. He created the very popular Insider series for National Geographic and produced 25 documentary films on topics ranging from primate intelligence to sumo wrestling to the illicit drug trade and the Gospel of Judas. So he's a man of great range. And his work was recognized with 3 Emmy Awards and a Peabody Award. So please join me in welcoming John. It's a great honor to have you here, John.
Thank you, Will. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And it's particularly fun to have you here at such a quiet, unexciting, stable time in the media world. There's not much going on,
That's right.
or for public television generally. And so, so just a quick word about format. So John and I are going to chat a little bit. then he's going to show a few clips from some of his favorite upcoming programs coming out of the GBH machine, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and beyond that, there may be time at the very end for additional clips. So why don't we start, John, if you don't mind, at a pretty high level, and just sort of, as you scan the horizon in the rapidly transforming media landscape, what are some of the major opportunities and threats for those programming franchises for GBH?
So yeah, it is a time of incredible flux. I can't believe it, but I've been working in this business now for a little over 30 years and have never seen anything even close. So there are opportunities and challenges. The opportunities, I think, are that we continue to produce programming that nobody else would produce. And because of that, we have an opportunity, weirdly, for audience growth, because so much of the kind of broad range of television has gone down market, that very few producers are hanging in and producing quality programming, programming with integrity, programming with deeply researched scripts and background. And so we have a big opportunity there to kind of hold on to and grow our audience. I think that in terms of challenges, there are legion. So we're being outcompeted by deep-pocketed, what are called over-the-top distributors. That's like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. Some of you all may use that approach to consuming television. I know for sure that our children who are in their 20s don't really watch broadcast television anymore. They consume a lot of television, but they do it by streaming, and they use these over-the-top providers. So many of them have deep pockets like Netflix, and it's very difficult to compete with them head-to-head for a title. So this is relevant to our Masterpiece series, for example, where we're out in the marketplace trying to buy British costume drama. And since the success of Downton Abbey, costume drama is really popular. And it's also become incredibly expensive because Netflix and Amazon have gotten into that market, and they have jacked up the prices. And we're still public media and don't have hugely deep pockets like they do. So when a prestigious title comes up, for example, in the last year, Dracula, based on the on the novel, came up, and that would have been a great and probably not that pursued title 8 years ago, but Netflix and Amazon got into it right away, and we were quickly outbid, and we'd never have a chance for that kind of stuff anymore. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to be cleverly positioning ourselves, but that's one of the biggest challenges. That and what I alluded to earlier about our children's viewing habits mean that it's harder and harder to kind of count on the public broadcasting audience kind of just graduating. They get to their 20s and 30s, start having families, turn to PBS. That had been the pattern over the past 40, 50 years. And now we have to figure out, well, what is the new pattern? We don't exactly know what that pattern is going to be. Are people going to just continue to only consume these smaller portions, what we call short form video? Will they neglect longer form science, longer form investigative? And will we see our numbers drop more than they're already dropping?
And so how, as the over-the-top providers grow and the media landscape generally changes, what's the role of social media across those sort of series, and what are the metrics? Is it still ratings that you focus on primarily, or how are the metrics evolving as the landscape changes?
So there are two really big things in that question. One is, what's the role of social media? And two, how do you measure your audience these days? And social media is it's a kind of a strange mistress, because you can't be without it. You must connect. You must have a social media presence, because without it, you kind of disappear for a lot of people, especially for the younger demographic coming up. And so we have a very aggressive social media and digital strategy in all of the 5 strands that Will mentioned. So each one of those groups, Masterpiece, Nova, American Experience, they all have very active social presence. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they have YouTube channels. So we're creating a huge amount of programming, I guess you'd call it, assets that are available. Most of it's short form. And we're following a strategy of trying to kind of cultivate a loyal community and audience. Our audience wants substance, and they want relevant content. And our social media strategy kind of aims at that too. It's saying, look, you've shown an interest in American history. We're going to show you a new way to look at American history in these short bites, or in a really significant gallery of photographs on Instagram. So in that way, we're trying to kind of cultivate them, and we're constantly pointing at our longer form programs while we're doing that. So we're saying, yeah, here's this short form about, so last year, for example, American Experience did a 6-part series on World War I called The Great War. And we had a huge social media campaign around that. And one of those features was War Letter Wednesdays. So on Wednesdays, our research team would go and find these amazing first-person accounts of either life on the home front or life from the trenches. In one instance, there was a fantastic letter written on the back of a peach can label. So some guy had a can of peaches in the trenches, and he got that off, and he wrote in this tiny script this long letter home. So that was a fantastic little thing, and it got a lot of attention online, and all the time we were pointing at the long series. So you like this, watch the long series. What we haven't been able to do, and this kind of dovetails into the metrics question, is definitively say, yes, this short form strategy, this social media strategy drove people to the long form. And why do we care about that? We care about it because that's really where our bread is buttered still, in terms of corporate underwriters, foundation support, individual support. Most of it's still, that's really the game.
That being the ratings, the Nielsen ratings, right?
Yeah, not just the Nielsen ratings, but streams.
Yeah.
So for example, we have watched our ratings gradually ski slope down over the last 10 years.
Along with network television generally.
Everybody. Yeah. All broadcast is going like that. A rare exception would be like a live sports program. At the same time, we're watching streams, climb. There's still a significant gap between that decline and this increase. And that's what we're trying to make up. And so we're hoping that social media can do that. So they, more thoroughly answer your metrics question is, we've completely reorganized, you probably hear about this in the fall board meeting, Will, we've completely reorganized our research group at GBH. And we're now going to be in a position to say, this is how many people we reached this month. And that will include not only New England and our radio and television, but our national broadcasts of all those strands. And it's measuring, yes, it's measuring Nielsen ratings. Those are still really important. It measures all of our streams. It measures amount of time people are spending on Instagram, on Google, on Facebook, on YouTube. And you come up with a cumulative number that is both kind of amazing, and also you wonder, how credible is that? When you see a Facebook number, maybe somebody just peeked and spent all of 5 seconds looking at a post, as opposed to spending 50 minutes watching a Nova.
Yeah. And how about podcasts? Are they becoming part of the mix?
Podcasts are absolutely becoming part of the mix. We already have 2 very strong podcasts. Masterpiece Studio is one of them. We launched that 3.5 years ago on the tail end of Downton Abbey, and it's managed to kind of hold on to its audience. So we're up over 6.5 million downloads on that podcast, so that's pretty good. And Frontline also has a podcast called the Frontline Dispatch, which is straight up investigative, longer form radio documentaries that are just available on demand. That's essentially what a podcast is. And we're developing podcasts for American Experience and Roadshow and Nova.
And so across those 5, which do you think is best positioned relative to those trends, and which is most challenged?
Yeah, so it's a really hard question. I think Frontline is an absolute leader, partly because the executive producer of Frontline, Rainey Aronson, is a kind of digital native. So she completely embraces the idea that we're no longer going to be just a broadcaster of long-form films. We're never, ever going to just produce a film. We are always going to produce a film and a podcast, a slate of maybe 20 short-form videos, text articles that will be available, deeply researched on the website. And in this way, approach an audience from all angles in hopes of kind of cultivating that audience and creating in them a kind of a loyal following. So they're very well positioned, but everybody else is very close on their heels. 3 of those series are documentary series: Frontline, American Experience, and Nova. So they all follow a little bit closer game plan than Masterpiece, which is a little bit more of a, as a series, its social media presence is much more fan-based. So they generate a huge number of video assets, which are clips from the various episodes. Do you want to see Queen Victoria dressed down the Prime Minister? Yes, here's that little clip. Same thing with Antiques Roadshow. Its audience has a very particular taste online. They want to watch appraisals, surprise. And so everybody who comes to that website, they're either coming to find, when can I get tickets to the next roadshow? Or, oh, I remember that appraisal about, that particular main boss. I want to, look at that. And then they get lost on the site, and they're like, 7 hours later, they come out.
So you mentioned Rainey, and she's an example. So as you look across those 5, tentpole programs, they've been around a long time. They've got this rich legacy, but they're generally facing generational transitions in leadership away from founding producers. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about the Rainey example of a successful transition, and more generally about that challenge for you.
So as Will is referencing, Frontline has gone through a really pretty remarkable leadership transition over the last 5 years. The founder, an incredibly talented, charismatic filmmaker named David Fanning, he created Frontline. And about 10 years ago, he spotted this talent, one of the producers creating films for Frontline, Rainey Aronson. And at the time, she was in her mid-30s or so. And he made a very conscious effort to cultivate her and bring her along, so that by the time that I arrived at GBH, which was about 5.5 years ago, Rainey was the senior producer, and we had just made her the deputy executive producer. So there was a very long kind of apprenticeship, and then in 2015, David stepped aside, and Rainey became the executive producer for Frontline. So it's,
she's great.
They have handled this in an amazing way, because essentially David created this thing, and you can imagine, it's a little bit like, imagine if you were a parent and a child had reached a certain age, and you decided to kind of step aside and let somebody else come in. They're kind of related to the child, but they're now going to become the primary parent. And so you can imagine the kind of emotional pull on that, because it's not just a business enterprise. This is a creative enterprise, and there's a huge amount of passion and emotion wrapped up in it. And so that is proven to be a very useful model. Very hard to mimic, but one that we're trying to follow
across the other four.
Yeah. So that's a long-term. It's a long-term prospect. Essentially what I do in my job is we have, we're very actively in conversations with all the series leaders talking about cultivating a bench. And, where is the person right now who will be doing this job in 5 years, for example? And as the business changes, the kind of built-in apprenticeship positions have also diminished. So it's not exactly clear where those people are. It's also not exactly clear what those series will look like in 5 and 10 years from now.
Can you talk a little bit about Studio 6?
Yeah.
What it is, and then what you see as sort of the longer-term potential for it.
Okay, so the unbelievably clever name, Studio 6, comes from the fact that we have 5 major production groups, and then there was this 6th group. And it had been where we did all of our lifestyle programming. I don't know if many of you know this, but GBH has always produced a large amount of what we call lifestyle programming, beginning back with Julia Child. And it was America's kind of first cooking show. So we still do a bunch of cooking shows, a woodworking show. This Old House started as a GBH franchise. And this group also did other things besides that, the occasional limited series. So one of my objectives was to create an opportunity for us to grow, but also to fill in gaps that were in the PBS grid. So we aim to produce programs that none of our 5 major series would produce, and we aim to do that in limited series. So, for example, we have a bunch of different stuff that's in the works right now. We've got a 3-part series called H2O, the molecule that made us. So that's not exactly a science show, and it's not exactly a current affairs show, and it's not exactly a history show, but it's a little bit of all of those things in 3 hours. So that's in production. We have a 4-part series with a working title, A Brief History of Madness, which is actually a mental health series. So nobody in American television right now is going to do a series on mental health. And yet mental health is a critically important area to be understood. And so Studio 6 is perfect for that. We're doing a 3-part series on working. What is the future of work? How will we work going forward? Well, it's not exactly a frontline. It's not an American experience. So it's one of these things that fits in this unique little niche. And what we've found is that we're having really huge success in terms of going out and finding underwriters to help support these programs. Another 2-part series on diabetes called Sugarland. And we feel like we're doing things that nobody else would do, and that are, I think in years ago when I first met you, I might have made this point that we are in a struggle for relevance in public media. So, you have so many choices. Why would you ever come to us? Well, you come to us because you're going to see programming that matters, and it's going to be thoughtful programming. It's going to be really well made, but they're also going to be great stories. We don't want to be the purveyors of spinach, and just be shoveling this into your mouth. We want you to come to the table and, embrace it.
Okay, so I want to come back to Masterpiece. I'm guessing a fair number of people in the audience are fans or have been, and Masterpiece is at this interesting juncture where you're post Downton Abbey, so post the greatest hit in the history of the franchise, in this new, more competitive environment where the over-the-top Netflix, Amazon, Hulu's of the world are competing for content. So how are you and Rebecca navigating that? What's the strategy to?
It is, I must say, it's in constant flux. I spend more time working with Rebecca and Suzanne Simpson, who's the deputy EP in Masterpiece, strategizing about what titles can we go for? Which ones do we have a chance to get? How do we kind of balance the number of episodes that we need to deliver to hold on to Viking River Cruises, one of our underwriters? You know, there's a floor there. You can't go below that or they start getting upset, right? And at the same time, we need to have the kind of titles that people have grown accustomed to. And this is a tricky thing. We're a little bit of a victim of our own success because Downton really was lightning in a bottle. You know, Rebecca will be the first one to tell you that she turned it down not once but twice, and eventually was convinced. Okay, let's do it. You know, do we really need another upstairs, downstairs? Okay, fine, let's do it. And it turned into this huge, huge success. It's also, you know, as masterpieces go, it's maybe a little bit more of a soap than a kind of great books based, you know, literature on film, right? And so it's very popular. I mean, it became part of the zeitgeist. I mean, you know, when you have the New Yorker making jokes about you, and you know, you show up in these other places, it's really both delightful and, you know, careful what you wish for. It's because on the back end of Downton, there was this clamor. Well, what's the next Downton? And you know, there probably won't be another Downton. We have a number of really fantastic long form.
Yeah, what are some of the things you're excited about for Masterpiece?
Well, so Victoria is one of them. Yeah. And I don't know if any of you are following Victoria. We're going into our third season, and to me, it's, you know, it still has a kind of an upstairs downstairs drama, but it's all historically based, and it's really fantastic. They're real characters from history. There's still a ton of drama. It's very smartly conceived and written. The writer and kind of creator of the program is a woman named Daisy Goodwin, and she and I were having a conversation a year or so ago, and I was like, Daisy, where did this come from? And she said, well, you know, she got a first in history at Oxford, and Victoria was her subject, so she really had a substantial background in it, but she'd done a lot of other types of television producing, including like reality programming, documentary, and so I was really kind of, all right, so I understand your historical thing, but where did the idea come from? And she said, well, I had at the time a 15-year-old daughter, and she was like a lot of 15-year-old daughters, extremely difficult. And one morning, I had a particularly hard time with her, and she left for school, and I thought to myself, what if tomorrow morning she woke up and was the Queen of England, or the Empress of all? And what would that be like? And that is exactly, you know, almost exactly what happened with Victoria. She came, you know, as a teenager to the throne. So she loved that, and you know, you can kind of see her sensibility. And now her daughter actually co-writes with her
That's fun.
screenplays. So anyhow, the challenge. Sorry, I went way off into a Victoria reverie. But the point is that we spend a huge amount of time trying to find titles that are going to work for us. And there are still a lot of, I would say, particular costume dramas. We have a clip from one that maybe we'll show that's coming up this fall called The Miniaturist. And it's a 3-part limited series based on a book with the same title. And you know, it's set in 1600s Amsterdam. You know, it's kind of an interesting twisted tale. I don't think Netflix would necessarily go for something like that, you know? And so we're always going to be able to, I think, find these little gems. And that's what Rebecca is actually unbelievably good at.
It seems like there's a, you know, Masterpieces sort of, there are multiple sub-genres, but there seems to be a lot of energy and dynamism in the mystery area. masterpiece movie with Sherlock and
Yeah.
the tunnel and
Right, and Grantchester, and it even used to be a separate sub-strand that was called Masterpiece Mystery, and we just decided too many different brands out there, so let's just call them all Masterpiece. But the mysteries tend to run in the summer, and they are uniformly popular. We have one right now called Endeavor, which some of you may
very good.
follow. It's the early stages of Inspector Morse, fantastic acting and great stories. They're really popular, and those two, I think, they're kind of franchises that it's kind of too late for Prime or Netflix to get involved with, and so we may still be able to kind of dominate that niche a little bit. We also have, these longer term things like, we call them repeating, returning series. So Victoria is an example, Poldark is an example, Grantchester is an example. And those are really important kind of anchors in our grid, in our broadcasting grid. And then we kind of add things like the Durrells or the Durrells of Corfu or the Miniaturist, which you'll see a little clip of.
So John, not that there is one, but what does an average work day look like for you? What do you actually do?
Yeah, what do I do? I remember when I was interviewing for this job, and I actually was friendly with my predecessor, and I had known her from the previous life, and I said to her name was Margaret Drain. I said, Margaret, what do you actually do all day? And she was so hard pressed. She's like, and now I realize why. And it's because there are about 10,000 different things every single day. This is the best part of the job, is that in the morning you can start out kind of trying to figure out which title is, which masterpiece title should we go for? This particular costume drama or this one has this actor, this one has this director, this one has this writer. In the middle of the day, you're suddenly deeply involved in, some moment in American history related to the space program, because we have this huge upcoming thing called Chasing the Moon, which is this phenomenal 6-part series that'll run next summer. And that bleeds into a conversation about Woodstock, which we're also doing next summer, both our 50th anniversary programs. And you're suddenly looking at footage of Woodstock, and they've got 4 days to go before the whole thing starts, and nothing's ready, and they've got food they're expecting maybe 25,000 people, and then you jump from there to like multiple personnel issues. That's actually what I spend most of my time dealing with, as anybody in management does, and maybe finish off the day with a rousing First Amendment situation because somebody wants to sue us because of a Frontline, and it's fascinating. I mean, the Frontline part of my day or days is amazing because we have a First Amendment lawyer on staff. We have so many kind of First Amendment issues that come up, and it's great to see the First Amendment as a living document in process. We did a story about the chicken industry, and the chicken industry did not like our story. We did a story about the NFL, and the NFL really didn't like our story. And they make all kinds of threats, and you're like, okay, is this for real? And who do we have to, at what point do I need to tell my boss this is going on? Or do we have exposure here? It's nothing if not exciting, I must say.
So this might be
and then there's screening. I have to screen. I screen everything that that goes out of that building. I have to watch.
And you were saying earlier you can't do that in the office, right?
Well, for all the other reasons.
Yeah.
I can't do that in the office, which is why having a place in Maine and taking a 3-hour train ride to get to it is really important. Part of my job, Will.
Okay, so this is, I think, a segue to some clips, but what, there may be overlap and there may not be, don't feel an obligation, but looking forward over the next 12 to 18 months, what are the 2 things you're personally most excited about? We won't tell anybody.
Okay.
Across the 5.
Okay, so I would say that one of them which may have relevance for this audience, is that we have just, I've just committed to developing a 3-part series on the Gulf of Maine. And we have been, since I came from Geographic, I've been trying to build a natural history capacity in our Studio 6 group. And we have so far, the kind of water show that I mentioned before, H2O, molecule that made us, is a little bit of a natural history show. And last summer we broadcast our very first natural history series called Rare, which follows a photographer named Joel Sartori, who is trying to document all the endangered species on the planet in studio style photography. And so we've done 2, we're in our 2nd season of Rare, and the Gulf of Maine would be our 3rd entry. And it was, if I may, occasionally at GBH during the summer we have food trucks show up in our parking lot, and I happened to be in line waiting for food truck, and somebody said, "Hey, John," and I turned around and it was this guy who I'd known from National Geographic, who lives in Maine. He's a photographer named Brian Scary. And I go, "Brian, you know, what are you doing here?" And he, "Well, I've just been in, I was interviewed by your radio station about this project I'm doing." And we started talking about this other project that he has in mind on the Gulf of Maine. And so at the food truck in the GBH parking lot, the Gulf of Maine project got going. And so I'm really excited about that. And the other one that I would say I'm most excited about is probably Chasing the Moon, which is this absolutely fantastic. You think you've seen and lived through, in all of our cases, the space program, the Apollo program. But this filmmaker, a guy named Robert Stone, takes such a unique tack. He's decided that, you know how you're watching a film and you hear the voice of somebody speaking, and then after you're finished looking at like some pictures, you cut to that person on camera. He's decided, I'm not going to do that. I want to leave you in the 1960s. You're never going to leave the 1960s. And you never see a contemporary interview on camera. His thinking being, that's just going to, you know, immediately I was looking at a picture of this talented mathematician named Poppy Northcutt, who was the only woman in Mission Control, which of course nobody knew. And you're going to cut to her today, you know, she's a woman of a certain age, and everybody's going to go, "Oh, well, this is her," and they're going to miss the point of what she was saying, which was, she was this dynamic mathematician who was responsible for bringing them back in Apollo 8 after they circled the moon. So I love his idea, and the effect is so immersive that it takes you right back. And I mean, it's amazing what he was able to find. He was out in Montana interviewing Frank Borman, and they spent 2 days doing interviews talking about his whole experience throughout the Apollo program. And at the end of it, Borman's driving him to the airport, wherever they are, I can't remember, going back to Bozeman or something like that. And they're about halfway, and he said, "You know, I forgot to tell you about this box of 35 millimeter motion picture film that I have in my attic. Would that be interesting to you?" Stop. They turn around, they race back. He finds this footage that right before Apollo 8, this filmmaker in Hollywood approached NASA and said, "We need to document this historic event. You're not documenting it appropriately." And he gave them like a proposal, something like $9 million. In the 60s, you know, forget it. But anyhow, they spent some money and they let him go in with the families while they were, I mean, doing all manner of different things. But the sequence that is most amazing is watching the Apollo 8 launch in Borman's living room. And what they would do is all the wives would get together, whomever was going to go up, and they would all gather at that person's home and watch the launch together. Well, the previous launch was Apollo 1, and everybody died on the launch pad in that horrible fire. And this cameraman, filmmaker, is sitting in their living room, literally on the carpet floor, and it's color, and it, you know, remember the colors and the hair and smoking, and everybody's watching this, and this poor woman, I think it's Sally Boardman, his wife, is sitting there literally chewing her nails with her 2 young sons, teenagers, with their hands on her shoulder as you hear the countdown. And you know, you are right there in the living room, and nobody's ever seen this footage before. It is amazing. It's the most powerful sequence in a film I've ever seen.
Cool. Well, so I think that may be a segue to a clip or two.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, I don't know if I can top that.
Sleep.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I would go asleep too if I was listening to me.
It'll be just a second.
That's a nice shot. Is that it?
Hey, John, while we're waiting, so do you miss actively making films yourself in your current role? Do you miss that at all?
Yes, I do miss that. You know, what I've had to learn is to find satisfaction in a different kind of way. When you're actually actively making films, you know, you start with an idea, you bake it, you work with a lot of great people. It's a hugely collaborative enterprise, and you get a result. And sometimes that happens over, you know, a compressed period of a year, year and a half. Sometimes it happens over a much longer period if it's a really big project. And it's a deeply satisfying thing to be able to do that. And now, you know, it's a much more amorphous kind of satisfaction where you're like, yes, we are orchestrating the change of leadership at Frontline. So Frontline is critically important, I think, to the kind of the civic underpinnings of our country, that kind of investigative work. So having that transition is crucial, in my view, to how we go forward as a journalistic enterprise and as we go forward as a country. So it's a different kind of satisfaction. It's not any less, maybe in some ways more important. And I still keep...
But occasionally you miss it.
Yeah, oh, totally. Not occasionally. I miss it a lot. But I get to keep my hand in a little bit. Like I said before, I screen everything and I give notes, and I have to do it from 30,000 feet as opposed to down, you know, at the root level.
Yeah. Are we ready to go, Wes?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, so let's see here. Well, let's start with this. So do I double click? I'm sorry, I'm a Mac person.
Poppy, what do you actually do during space flights here in Mission Control?
Well, my job is to get the astronauts safely back to Earth from the moon.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it means determining what their position is, their present position, feeding the information into a computer program, and getting back their maneuver angles and how much thrust they have to get back to the Earth.
So you're computing their trajectory for the return to Earth?
That's right.
It was a complete peculiarity to have a woman in an operational role in mission control. I was the first one. For quite a while, I was the only woman in a technical role in Houston. There were some computer programmers, a few of those, but in terms of working on the engineering side, I was the only one. I mean, it was a boys' club, no doubt about it. I was sort of the trophy. I was blonde, I was young, I was thin. I wore, you know, the ladies' fashion clothes. The mere fact that a lot of women found out for the first time that there was a woman on mission control was a very big deal. I thought it was important that people understand that women can't do these jobs, going into science, going into technology. Was it sexist? Yes, but you got to start somewhere.
So she's amazing, and you know, nobody's ever heard of her. She had a moment, as you saw, she had a little bit of publicity in Life, did a spread, and but what you don't see, but which is we're working hard to get rights to use the clip, is this correspondent, I think it's Jules Stein from CBS, you know, before the clip that you saw, which is kind of what they showed on television, the camera's rolling, and he's making these comments like, well, should she hold her headset down near the hem of her miniskirt, so that people, their eyes will be drawn there, and she's just sitting there, kind of like having to put up with this. It's amazing. I mean, what Robert does is he uses moments that have been cut out to give a fuller portrait of what was really happening, and obviously Poppy's really good about it.
That's cool. So should we do one more clip and then go to Q&A?
Yeah. And how do I get out of this? Sorry. Oh. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. So let's do a. I'll do this clip from the Miniaturist. I think it's in this one. Is that right? Oh, in the in Chrome. Okay, yeah, there it is.
John earlier made the comment that almost never you try to show a clip without some sort of a glitch. So just
although in this case it's me that's the glitch. So here, this is from the Miniaturist.
It's coming.
It's proving the point, Will.
Right on cue.
Yeah, exactly. Just a long countdown, I guess.
Why don't we maybe, John, while we're waiting for that, do you want to?
Yeah, it should be running. I see. Well, okay, maybe it's in.
I see something circling there.
Yeah. Huh, I don't know how to make that one work. Yeah. Well, we can bail on it, or
Why don't we,
this one?
let's try that, John, and then maybe we'll, if it takes a little while to warm up, we'll take our first question.
Looks like it needs its box. Yeah, that one won't work, I don't think. All right, let's do one other. Is that okay, Will?
Yep.
Okay. This is an American Experience clip from a film coming up this fall on eugenics.
They are identified early, categorized, feeble-minded, imbecile, idiot.
It was almost a mania that sort of swept through the country.
The slogans were simple, things like better babies and happy families.
By the 20s, eugenics was a household word.
You mean they're going to stop me from having children ever? Exactly.
She is sent to the hospital for an appendectomy and comes out sterilized.
When Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he said, Germans must emulate what the Americans are doing.
That is it. So anyhow, that's an upcoming American Experience.
Excellent.
That's an unbelievable story. Also, unfortunately, very relevant today in terms of this idea of what constitutes, an American. And at the time, there's amazing footage from Kansas State Fair had the perfect family contest. In the same way that you would award a blue ribbon for a great pie. The idea was you could do the same thing for a family. Well, what constituted that perfect family? And anyhow, it's from a fantastic filmmaker, a woman named Michelle Ferrari. I'm really excited about that one too.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, John. All right, so let's open it up for questions.
Questions? Ma'am, hold on. Mike.
PBS Passport is an excellent streaming tool to compete against, the repetitive forces of streaming. Has that been a useful tool? Because I know I use it and I love it.
Oh, great! I'm glad you use it, and I'm glad you like it. If you don't know what the question refers to, PBS Passport is our answer to streaming services. So it's as a member benefit. If you join your local PBS station at a certain level, I think it's $65, you avail of yourself the opportunity to stream any PBS program anytime you'd like, and it's called Passport. And depending on where you're from, if you're in Boston, it's WGBH Passport, and it would carry whatever your local station is called. And yes, it's been hugely helpful. What we find so far is that most people use it to stream drama, as opposed to any of our other major series. It's not that they don't use it for that, but it's primarily seems to be used so far for drama, and it's been very helpful as a means to drive membership numbers up. And Masterpiece is particularly active. We've been taking a very active role in trying to kind of promote towards the audience and say, look, you can stream the entire season of X if you join Passport. And we're seeing that actually helps. And stations really like it because it's localized. One of the biggest challenges PBS has is that we're not really a network. The folks who run PBS down in Washington, in Crystal City, Virginia, actually, like to think of it as a network, but we're so decentralized. We're like the United States under the Articles of Confederation, if you're an American history fan. So there's no constitution yet, like unifying it, like say NBC, CBS, or ABC. The stations hold a lot of power, and Passport is one way that they've been able to kind of activate their local communities, and then they see the benefits of those memberships. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
Lynn Bolger.
So does GBH also compete against other stations for programming? I know you're a huge producer, but do affiliates compete against each other?
You mean within the PBS system?
Yes.
So not really. The way the system was originally set up, stations would be the major producers. And in the early days, after the Public Broadcasting Act and the creation of Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS in the late 60s, it was an LBJ creation. There were many producing stations. It consolidated over the years, and only more so in the last 10 years. So that there are really only about 4 major producing stations anymore. GBH, WNET in New York, they do Nature and American Masters and Great Performances, for example. WETA in Washington, which produces the PBS NewsHour, and Capital Fourth, and a number of different programs like that, Washington Week. And then to a lesser extent, there are other stations like WTTW in Chicago is a little bit of a national producer. Twin Cities Public Television, which we call TPT, is also a little bit of a producer, and there's Oregon Public Broadcasting also. So the capacity for production has diminished in other stations. Los Angeles had some difficulty. Now they may be coming back online. San Francisco got completely out of the national production business and decided just to focus locally. So we don't really compete there because it's more of an oligopoly, actually.
I'm thinking about Ken Burns, and he shows up on PBS all the time. Now, is he loyal? Or, I mean, how does he stay in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So huge force, broadcasting force, Ken Burns, and yes, he's loyal to PBS because I think he can do what he wants to do on PBS in a way that he wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. Now, conceivably, he could make a boatload of money doing a deal with Netflix and doing a series. I think, and I don't know exactly why he wouldn't do that, except for he is loyal to the system. He has huge following within the system, and the system gives it right back and is hugely supportive of his programming. When he comes out with a series like Vietnam, everybody is stepping up, and our strength and our weakness, the fact that we're so decentralized, as I was referencing before, means that we're grassroots. We're in every community. There's 350 PBS stations across the country. And when somebody like Ken Burns or us want to roll something out, we have this grassroots constituency that we can reach out to and say, this is going to be fantastic for your community, for your schools, for you name it. And they'll jump on the bandwagon. So I think that's one reason why. And there's also a kind of freedom to what he has. Or there's a benefit of the freedom of production that PBS allows.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. So what's he like to work with?
I've never actually worked with him, and I don't really know him. I've met him a couple of times, so I couldn't really say. His brother Rick is somebody who's produced quite a bit for GBH and American Experience, and he's a very talented filmmaker. So yeah, it seems to run in the family.
Great. I think Tim had a question in the back there.
Take one more, maybe.
Do two more.
Two more.
Thanks. So much of the emphasis in higher ed these days seems to be on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And the humanities, as a rule, are on the ropes and in decline, history, arts, literature. And it seems like so many of the problems in society are humanities problems, not STEM problems. What is the truth? What really happened in the past? And I wonder if you ever see yourself as sort of defending the humanities. I've heard you describe the day-to-day and program by program what you do, but I wonder if you see your role and the role of PBS in defending the humanities in American culture.
That's a really fantastic question. So it's we're victims in some ways of kind of a follow the money syndrome, and so it's easier to get funding for STEM-related programs like NOVA. It's much harder to get funding for American Experience, and American Experience consequently has a much smaller footprint, which to me is a travesty because it's the only ongoing American history series on American television. I mean, you can find stuff on History Channel, which is not really history as much as maybe it should be or as it really started out to be. And so for me, that is a great tragedy. So we do find ourselves redoubling efforts to fundraise in that particular area of the humanities, history programming and support. We also are trying to put the A in STEAM programming, where you're putting arts right alongside science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and trying to do that through our NOVA program, where we're reckoning more online than in the actual programs by introducing a little bit more of a humanities question into some of these science issues. What's kind of interesting is in our working series, which I referenced, there are a lot of people who we've been talking to in the research side of it who say, a lot of the STEM type work in the future is most easily roboticized and done through artificial intelligence, whereas the much more difficult things require a humanities background. So we're sympathetic to it. We try. We're actually doing a second season of Poetry in America, which is one of our, which was something that we were the presenting station for last year, which was really fantastic. 12-part, half-hour series on poetry. We're going to do another 12 of those this year. So we should be more intentional about it. I think. It's a good question. I'll take that away with me.
Hank had a last question.
After your inspiring comments, I'm somewhat reluctant to ask this one. It goes a little beyond WGBH, but as I recall, the federal government provides some $450 or $500 million to public broadcasting. Where does that stand at this stage of the game?
So the federal payment is about $465 million, and that includes all public broadcasting, including radio. So just for comparison.
Hank was very involved at Maine Public Radio.
Ah, I see. Okay.
And television.
Yeah, so for comparison, our neighbors to the north spend about $1 billion a year on public broadcasting there, CBC. So the United States has always been, very kind of minimally supported, regarding public broadcasting. And that it's fine. It's worked fine. It's ended up being very much a public-private partnership. Where it stands right now is right after the election, everybody was particularly nervous, although, it's a little bit of a matter, of course. So, for example, throughout the George W. Bush administrations, we were zeroed out in every annual budget. And public broadcasting over that 8-year period grew. So the reason is because we have a lot of bipartisan support. And the reason for that, and Maine's a good example, is that a lot of state legislatures get covered by public broadcasting. And Maine's legislature is covered by public broadcasting, gavel-to-gavel coverage. That's true in many states. Nebraska is another good example. Public broadcasting is also knit into a lot of emergency broadcasting systems in various states. It's also knit into a lot of, through PBS Learning Media, which is our educational aspect. A lot of state legislatures really like that. So there's a lot of grassroots support, and it doesn't hurt that at least in the last several years, the Finance Committee chairmen, both in the House and the Senate, are big fans. These are currently held, obviously, by Republicans, are big fans of public media. Tad Cochran in Mississippi, his father, I think, was one of the founding members of Mississippi public television, public broadcasting. So it goes across the aisle, which is good. My bigger concern is less the kind of vagaries of politics, which are always worth considering and being wary of, and more this question of relevance and how the next generation is going to choose to consume us. And it makes me feel like we need to spend a lot more on marketing, something that public media we've never had the money to do that. And when we've had the money, we've chosen not to do it, probably wisely, thinking that we're stewards of public funding. But if you aren't seen, then you're never going to be heard. And I feel like that's something public media needs to really think seriously about. One of my colleagues who runs radio at GBH used to work at NPR for a long time, and they were always having this conversation about when are people going to show up and start watching us? Because we do really well with kids, and then it drops off and they disappear from the public media sphere, and then they start coming back, which gave rise to this philosophy which we're all trying to live by, which they had at NPR, which was people get to a certain age, and as they put it, they said, when you give a shit, there's NPR. And so we're hoping the same applies for us.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Will and John. And John, don't forget about the academic institution on the Gulf of Maine. As you move forward, I would be remiss to not remind you of that. But thank you everyone for coming, and we will see you next week on Tuesday at 9 o'clock.